A warm welcome, viewers, and thank you once again for tuning in to the show this evening. I'm your host, Chef Andy, and very importantly, before I continue, very important that I also mention the guest on the show. Some of you may have seen him on the show before, but I will allow Preston to say hello before I proceed to mention the dish and, of course, take you through the dish of the day. Preston?
Hi, lovely people. Still Preston Jane 1 here. It's glad to join you, and Chef Andy, thank you for the invite again.
Karibu sana. Now, very importantly, before we continue, I'll take you through the ingredients just to give you an idea of what to expect for today's show. Now, we're going to be making Shami Kebabs. Now, this is, of course, a very much Asian kind of a recipe.
Yeah.
We are, of course, going to be incorporating some beautiful ingredients. So I'm going to start mentioning them from the very front. You will require about 2 large pieces of garlic cloves, about 3 to 4 pieces of some green fresh chilies, about 1 whole egg, and about 1 teaspoon of garam masala. You'll also require some yellow lentils that are already soaked in some water, a bit of some fresh mint leaves, and about 1 tablespoon of minced ginger. You'll also require 1 tablespoon of cumin powder, about 100 grams of some lamb mince, 1 whole imported lemon, and a bit of some flour to aid you in incorporating your patty. You'll also require some fresh coriander leaves, 2 medium-sized fresh limes, about 2 medium-sized pieces of some white onion as well. You'll also require some store-bought mango chutney. This is, of course, just for serving, a bit of some olive oil to cook with, some salt and some black peppercorns to crush in, especially just for the bit of a flavor. And last but not least, a bit of water to aid you in the cooking process. But before we begin, we'll, of course, give you this chance to sit back, relax, and unwind. And we'll catch you after a short break. Add your garam masala at this stage. Once your mixture is completely pureed down,
We're doing all the onions in it. Right?
all the onions go in, yeah? Hello viewers, and welcome back yet again. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've pretty much begun by introducing Preston. Some of you may have already seen him on the show before. I have, of course, managed to invite him back on the show yet again. We're going to be making some Asian food as always. And now, of course, just to bring you back to scratch with what we've done, we've pretty much introduced the ingredients. We're going to be making a Shami Kebab. So we're going to start off the process very, very simply by cooking our lentils. So I'll, of course, require you to turn on the heat on the bottom.
And then
Now, very important to mention, especially when working with lentils, do always take some time in soaking them a little before cooking. This, of course, aids you in cooking them a little faster.
and save gas.
Exactly, and save gas, of course. So you can lift the lid and we'll begin by adding our lentils to the mix, to the pot.
So this is what the Indians call dal, right?
This is what the Indians would refer to dal, yes. Right. So as we allow the water to come to the boil, very importantly, we're going to also
add more
add
water?
a bit more water, yeah, just to aid in making sure that they fully cook through.
Yes.
Right, so as that continues to cook, we'll of course jump into the next step of our process, which is of course combining the rest of our ingredients. So to this, I'm going to begin by adding a bit of some fresh chilies. So this, we're basically going to blend the ingredients all together.
Yes.
And proceed to mix a little after. Now, maybe if I can share a small history of this very, very simple dish. A Shami Kebab was actually designed by a chef, and he was actually making it for a superior leader that was actually not able to chew meat. So this guy basically had no teeth. So the idea behind blending all the ingredients is basically just to incorporate the fact that the person who's supposed to eat a Shami Kebab should actually pretty much be toothless.
Just swallow.
They should
not
actually
chewing.
just be able to just put it in the mouth and swallow without chewing much.
That's awesome.
So very, very important to mention that for the fact that we're using beef mince. So we're going to be using some lamb mince for this recipe. So to the blender, we're also going to be adding our ginger.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, all this is of course going to be blended together. We're going to add our garlic, add your garam masala at this stage, and add your cumin powder. So this is basically just to give it a very, very powerful spice.
Spicy taste.
Exactly. To that, we're also going to be adding a bit of some lemon juice. So I'm actually going to hand you this and allow you to squeeze in the lemons.
The sieve you said is
The
to
seeds we're
prevent
definitely
the
going
seeds
to
from falling.
exactly, exactly. Right, so as we do that, we're also going to be incorporating a bit of onions to our dish. So I'm also going to chop those into quarters. Simple as that. We're also going to be adding in our fresh coriander, which we're basically going to blend together as soon as Preston is done. Very important to also mention, we're also going to be incorporating some mint to this recipe. So I'm going to basically proceed to, let me take that away. So what we're going to basically do is proceed to break off the sprigs of the mint leaves and add them into our jug. As I mentioned, if you do have a food processor, it will also do the same process. Remember, the idea is to basically blend your ingredients together. You can also add that last one. Now, very important to also remind you, we're going to be using a bit of lemon and limes for this recipe. You may, of course, not be sure of the flavors, or if you haven't actually tried the two in separate different recipes, you may, of course, realize that the lemon will, of course, be a little sweeter,
Yes.
but the lime is actually a little sharper.
Yeah.
So this we're basically going to be using just for the plating part of the show. Now, into that, we're also going to add some fresh coriander leaves. So I'm going to throw in a nice big bunch of coriander into our jug. You can just lift the lid up.
Yeah.
Right?
So we give it some time.
Exactly. That should actually, if of course soaked overnight, it should take you about 10 to 15 minutes to soften those up.
Yes.
And then we'll add the rest of the ingredients. Right, so into our jug. Remember, it may of course be very hard to blend that together when it's in its state.
Oh yeah. So
We're going to
helps
add a
in-
bit of water. This is of course just to aid in making sure that we can actually get that perfectly minced.
Yes.
Right, so once done, proceed to move your mixer into a jug or a food processor if you do have one available to you. Proceed to add your onions once your mixture is completely pureed down.
We are doing all the onions in it. Right?
All the onions go in, yeah. Right, so once that is blended up into a smooth paste, should actually be able to lift it very, very simply with a spoon. So it should actually almost resemble like a minced kind of a sauce or a chutney. So we're pretty much going to be adding this into the pot with a bit of the meat once that continues to cook. So we can lift the lid off completely. And I can just put that on the side here. Right, so very, very importantly, as soon as your lentils actually begin to start fully cooking, we're pretty much going to incorporate the ingredients in our jug, and we'll also incorporate the meat. But before we get there, very, very important that we do take this opportunity to take our first break on the show, but stay tuned. When we do come back, I will take you through the process of combining the ingredients and of course combining your patties as well, which will of course take us to the last and final step, which is basically to sear those on a hot pan with a little bit of some oil. So please stay tuned. We'll see you in a little bit. And all you need to do is pour your mixture into your sieve. And all you need to do now is allow that to just continue to drain very, very gently. And of course, crush in some black peppercorns. And proceed to mix that for anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're with us just before we took the break, we pretty much began by soaking our lentils, which have basically been cooking for about 20 minutes. We've also blended some of the ingredients which we had, which is of course the garlic, the ginger, a few of the spices, and of course the fresh coriander. And we're pretty much now going to jump into the next step of assembling our kebabs. So very, very importantly, we'll start by taking the lentils out of the heat completely. And you can pour them into a sieve. So basically all you need to do is allow for your lentils to cool off very, very slightly undisturbed, which is of course also going to call for the next step, which is basically blending the lentils in with the rest of the ingredients that we had blended in a little earlier. So once those are drained, proceed to pour them while still hot into a blender. Remember, this will of course make it so much easier for you to get or turn them into a puree and combine them with the rest of your ingredients. Right, and once that's done, all you need to do is proceed to blend the mixture together once more. Right, once that's done, we're basically now going to remove most of the water that we have in the mixture. So for that, you'll of course need once more a bowl just to drain in, and of course a sieve just to sieve your mixture with. And all you need to do is pour your mixture into your sieve. And all you need to do now is allow that to just continue to drain very, very gently. You can give it a shake. And that should actually aid you in getting rid of all of the water that is actually still in your mixture. And remember, because of the fact that we'll also be combining this with some meat and it'll go into a pan, very important that you also try and keep the mixture as dry as possible. So proceed to shake that, trapping away any particular liquid that pours off. And something also you can of course use with the liquid that's actually left over, you can actually also be able to boil some lentils in the same liquid, and you can actually be able to reuse a liquid because it actually contains quite a bit of flavor from everything we blended in there. So as that continues to reduce its water content, be sure to have another bowl ready. Perfect. Once that's done,
get a thick paste.
exactly. So once that's done, proceed to move it into a clean bowl. So you'll just tipple it over here. So tipple your mixture into a clean bowl and discard the rest. And now all we need to do is continue to combine the rest of our ingredients before combining it into a patty and actually proceeding to fry on a pan. So to your mixture, proceed to add your minced lamb.
So that the meats to look very nicely dry.
Exactly. So this is of course to also mention, always make sure your mince is also as lean as possible. So very important to remind the viewers at home, make sure that also if you're going to be working with mince, some good suggestions that I like to share, always try and also get your mince done as you wait if you can, or buy it as fresh as possible. Now what happens is on most occasions meat will tend to also discolor if you actually buy mince that was of course minced way back before you purchased it, and it's actually also going to lose out on all the water and the juices. So very important that if you get your mince, make sure it's minced as quickly, as closer to the time you need it as possible, and as fresh as possible.
That's good.
Right, now into a bowl with the mince, we're also going to be incorporating a bit of some egg. So I'm just going to crack one whole egg into the mixture. Right, and once that's done, all we need to do is, sorry.
So how minced is this? How fine should be the minced meat?
Actually, for this particular recipe, it should be as fine as possible. So you do get different stages of mince. Of course, for the mince that you'll probably use for items such as meatballs, burger patties, and such for kebabs, be sure to always maybe even mention to the vendor or the butcher that will do the mincing for you. Maybe you can actually ask him to mince the mixture twice.
Nice.
And that way you'll actually make sure that it's actually very clean and it's actually also very lean.
Very lean. And just remembering that you mentioned the invention came from making it for a royal who was toothless.
Exactly. So very important that you also remember that the kebab mixture should actually have nothing to bite in it.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why we actually blend the mixture twice, just to make sure if there's any particular bits of veg or garlic or ginger that are in there, you actually manage to puree them completely. Right, and very importantly, before you finish off, season with a bit of salt.
Bit of salt.
And of course, crush in some black peppercorns. And proceed to mix that for anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes. This is of course to make sure that you actually have a beautiful consistency right through.
I love black pepper too much. I find myself then doing mango with black pepper.
Actually, black pepper is a very, very good addition to cooking. It actually brings out the best in the sweetness or the savoriness of most dishes. And it actually pairs very, very nicely with salt. So with the two particular ingredients, you can actually be able to execute any particular dish. And also to mention, for some of you at home who are also watching, remember black pepper and salt can actually season pretty much anything in the kitchen. So if you actually play your cards right with the ingredients, you can actually be able to survive with just salt and black pepper.
Is it well mixed right now?
Now that is perfectly mixed. Now, once that is done, we're pretty much going to proceed on to the next step of combining this into some patties. But very, very important to also mention, we are of course also going to be chilling the patties in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
So we've pretty much got a few pieces that I had cooled off a little earlier.
Yeah.
So we're going to begin by transferring this into a mold. And basically the mold is basically just to give us a shape.
A shape.
Yep.
For presentation.
For presentation purposes, yes. So begin your process by very, very lightly.
So it doesn't stick.
Exactly. You're actually way ahead of us today, which is good.
I've been here with you, and one thing is being with you. Someone grasps stuff very.
It actually checks in
fast,
quite quickly. Right, so all you need to do now is you're going to scoop the topmost part of the mixture,
So
making
that
sure so that you
water?
leave the water at the bottom. Yep. And of course, as I mentioned, you can of course be able to turn up the same size patties by using any particular mold of choice. You can actually use any particular lid, maybe even a lid from a plastic container. You can slice the top off completely, and it'll actually give you a ring that you can
Flat
actually
to the
be
brim?
able, flat to the brim. And now something also to mention, if you're actually also looking for molds such as this, these are easy to acquire at any particular kitchenware store. So you can actually be able to find some of this, and they're very, very handy. You can use them for pastries, for meats, even shaping up your burgers in the weekend. They're very, very handy for
making
doing
an
so.
extra?
Yeah, so we'll be pushing
So
this to the side.
Push it to the side.
And you can just place one
Then
more
I
at the
still-
end.
Do I still do the oil, or this one is
No,
still
no, no.
oil?
Now you can actually go right through.
Okay.
Now something also to remind viewers at home, remember the mixture will of course have to sit in the refrigerator and take some time to set. I will of course also mention, if you can of course make the mixture maybe a night before and allow it to sit in the refrigerator already molded up, it will of course also save you the time and effort of completing the dish at the very end, or rather right after you pretty much finished doing your mixture. Something also to share with you, for the chickpeas, you can, or for the lentils rather, you can actually substitute those for chickpeas or any particular pulses or grains of your choice, depending of course on what you're pretty much going to be looking at making for your dinner meal.
Can it accommodate any other? Or the
No. Now this one is full. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to transfer this into the fridge. We're going to allow that to set up for about an hour to an hour and a half. So it definitely requires a bit of time to set. And of course, through the process, it's actually also going to combine in flavors, giving it just enough time to marinate.
Also makes it, does it work on its compactability, like make
Yeah,
it like
what happens is once it goes into the dish, remember now we've basically molded it into the shape that it is.
Yes.
So as you can be able to see maybe from the cameras, the liquid will actually start to form right at the bottom. So this is the only way of making sure that the liquid, the little bit of liquid that you couldn't remove with the sieve, it's actually going to drain off completely, leaving just the solid mixture, which is something that you can be able to transfer and of course fry on a pan.
That's nice.
Now, but because of the fact that we do need to set this for a little bit, we will of course take a very, very quick break. And when we do come back, I will of course be able to show you a separate batch that is actually set up as well. And we're going to proceed to the frying process, which will of course entail just a few ingredients, which is your oil, a bit of salt and pepper to taste, and I'll take you right to the last and final step of the dish, which is basically the plating. So please don't touch that dial. We'll see you in a little bit. Pressing continuously while exerting pressure right over the top. Very importantly, before I conclude the show, you will of course be our judge today. I will of course allow you to sample that and tell us how we did. So basically what you should be looking for is a beautiful balance between the saltiness of the patty Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're with us just before we took the break, we pretty much finished making our Shami Kebab mixture. We pretty much allowed that to rest in the refrigerator. And now I basically have one that we had actually put in a little earlier. So we're left with just the last and final part, which is basically to fry them. So Preston, if you can do us the honors. Yes, sir. And as he does so, we're also going to continue to prepare the rest of the ingredients which we're going to be using just to garnish this very simple dish. So I'm going to begin by slicing 2 whole limes. One, of course, which we'll be using to drizzle over the kebabs, and the other we're basically going to be placing just on the side on the plate. Proceed to take out the seeds. Of course, the ones visible to your naked eye. And proceed to do so for all 4 pieces. And as your pan continues to heat up, very important to mention also, always allow for any particular meals that have actually been set in the refrigerator to sit out for at least anywhere between 3 to 4 minutes before frying. This is of course just to get the cold out of the, to allow you to just get rid of the cold from the inside.
I've never done that. Now I've learned something. Does it also apply to when you microwave them?
Now, with microwaving, it may be a little technical for the fact that if you microwave, for instance, patties such as this that are not fully cooked, you may actually have instances where it's not actually cooked completely. So I would recommend, if you're going to microwave anything in the same size as a patty, maybe you've got some burgers that you bought and you pretty much want to reheat. Be sure to always also maybe put, or using your finger, just make a small hole in the center.
Yeah, that's what they use, the burger.
Exactly. So, and this is basically going to allow it to puff up as it continues to cook. And what happens is that little pocket that you leave on the imprint that you leave will actually close up as soon as it heats up, because the meat will also contract in size. And that's also another checkpoint you can use for patties. But if you're going to be working with patties that are not cooked, I would recommend cook them first so that you can actually be able to microwave. Because what happens is a microwave will pretty much extract all the moisture from your patty, and what happens is it's just basically going to crack once it's heated up, so it won't be able to hold its shape.
I get that.
Right, now onto your hot pan. We're going to proceed to add some olive oil. So be sure to add just enough to be able to fry each of your patties on each side. And all you're left to do is slide them very, very gently on the surface of your container or your tray. And very, very simply, by patting them down, making sure that they're of course holding shape, proceed to add your patties onto your hot pan. Now, as mentioned, remember the chickpeas are pretty much already cooked through. So basically this process will of course be very, very quick, especially if you've actually allowed the mixture to, or allow your lentils to cook through completely. And of course, because of the fact that we're also using mince, this will of course cook a little faster for the fact that we've basically got most of the mixture composed of just herbs and water. So what happens is in the time that you actually manage to brown the patties on one side, as soon as you turn them over, cook them for about another 3-4 minutes, they're actually ready to serve.
Ready to serve.
Yep. Now, as that continues, I'm also going to just grab a bit of the mixture from the one that we'd actually set aside. And due to the fact that we do still have at least one more portion that we can add to that, I'm basically just going to take it or do it once more for some of you who may have missed out. So very, very simply, using a mold of your choice, proceed to press the mixture into the mold. Of course, beginning with 1 tablespoon, proceed to press very, very firmly. Once completely pressed down, proceed to add a 2nd tablespoon, pressing continuously while exerting pressure right over the top. And this will of course make sure that you also don't have any air pockets in your patty and that the shape is also very well composed. And while we do so, we can actually proceed to turn this over. So I'm just going to lift those very gently. Now, very important also to make sure that you lift them very, very gently because they do actually tend to crack very quickly.
Yeah.
And once you've achieved a beautiful golden brown color on each side, those should actually be ready to come out of the heat. You can also, of course, add a little bit of some oil if your pan is too dry. Now, I don't know if I've managed to convince you to try out some patties. Maybe you can actually now try a vegetarian alternative to the meat one.
I'll try this, and I'll be coming to you for more notes on any other.
So, as I mentioned, even for the viewers at home, the technique of making kebabs is very, very closely similar to making burgers. Of course, there are some of the ingredients that are very much different in consistency, such as the addition of lentils in place of breadcrumbs. Those will also give you a very, very beautifully composed patty. And as I mentioned, if you're going to be using some semolina flour or rice flour for that matter, do make sure that you actually do a bit of research before you try out the recipe, because different flours will always give you a very, very different result. So for this one, we basically used a blend of semolina, which has a touch of chickpeas, which will of course also give a very, very beautiful flavor. Right, so as those are almost done, we're pretty much going to move them onto the plate. So I'll allow you to do that, giving me just enough time to add an extra 2 patties onto our pan, which, as I mentioned, very simply proceed to press those on any particular surface. Be sure to make sure that the surface is also nice and clean before doing so. Perfect. Now, just to finish off the last one piece that we have on our board,
Some addition of oil.
a little bit of oil once more, and by sliding that off your board, it should actually come out very, very gently. And proceed to fry as you did for the first few pieces, and continue to do the same until your mixture is complete. Now, of course, just to finish the ones that we had actually done a little earlier, or the ones that are actually ready at the moment. So it's a very, very simple technique of finishing this off. We're going to begin by drizzling a bit of some freshly squeezed lime over the top. So I'm going to allow you to do that for us. And while Preston does so, I'm also going to mention that we do have some chutney here that I had mentioned is store-bought, of course. You can, of course, be able to find very, very many different recipes for making your own chutney at home. For this particular Shami Kebabs, I'm going to be pairing that with a very, very simple mango chutney. Now, this, of course, is a composition of a bit of sugar, salt, some unripe mangoes, a bit of some spices, maybe some paprika and some cumin powder. And all you need to do is basically cook all your ingredients together. And once the mixture is actually nice and heavy, you should actually be able to find that it should actually be almost the consistency of jam. Once that is done, all you need to do is take it out of the heat, put it in a separate container, and this can actually last in the fridge for up to 2 to 3 months.
Oh, that's nice.
Of course, if it's actually kept at the same constant temperature through, should actually last you a little
Those who are
longer.
living in areas where we have blackouts all the time, Don't
So if
refrigerate
if
it
you
for-
of course if you of course maybe in a place that your refrigerator may not be on consecutively, you can actually also store it in an airtight container. So any particular jam jars that you may be able to find will also work. That is of course if you don't have access to a refrigerator. Yeah. Right, now to finish that off, we're of course going to garnish that very, very simply with a bit of some freshly chopped chili. So
one half lemon piece is enough to.
actually you can do a second one rather.
second one.
Yeah, so because remember what happens is the lime actually brings a beautiful flavor to the dish, and it actually manages to accentuate the flavors of all the spices
Of all
that you
the
added in
spices.
there. So the lemon will actually bring them up to the surface, and you can actually be able to taste them much better.
No.
Right, so once your chili is chopped, all you're left to do is garnish that with a few sprigs of some fresh coriander leaves. So I'm just going to pluck some from the batch right next to me. Tear those
Are
very,
we
very
ready
gently.
to turn
Yeah,
this?
we can actually turn that over. So by simply placing over a bit of some fresh coriander leaves, you can finish that off by placing some 2 slices of some fresh lime. And of course, very, very importantly, always remember to complete your dish by adding a bit of some chutney, because this of course also tends to be very, very dry in taste and in texture once fried. So onto your plate goes your mango chutney.
No, this is gourmet.
Now that is very, very tasty. And of course, just to finish that off, you can also pluck off a few sprigs of some fresh mint leaves, and you can scatter those right over your chutney. Those actually go quite well with the dish. I will of course allow you to taste this, so I'm just going to slide this mixture off completely. You can also sprinkle over a bit of some fresh chilies over the top. Now I'm actually going to allow you to try this one piece that's left over.
Yes.
But of course, as I mentioned, 2 particular beautiful characteristics of a good kebab are of course the marriage between the savoriness of the chutney and of course the sweetness of the patty. So I'm going to place a bit of our chutney onto a plate. Break onto that a few sprigs of some fresh mint leaves. And we can actually take this off the heat completely. So this will of course cook very, very quickly. Simple as that. Now, of course, very importantly, before I conclude the show, you will of course be our judge today. I will of course allow you to sample that and tell us how we did. So basically what you should be looking for is a beautiful balance between the saltiness of the patty, the sweetness of the chutney, and of course the sharpness of the mint leaf. How did we do?
Now this is debonair.
Exactly.
This is debonair. You can do this at home.
And as I mentioned, most of the ingredients, the only thing that I could mention that you may want to substitute, especially for you who pretty much you enjoy your meals without any particular gluten in them, in place of using all-purpose flour, you can find some rice flour, chickpea flour, or even potato flour. They contain much less calories in them. They also contain much less gluten. And you can actually be able to combine the same. And of course, even if you're looking at a much easier technique of doing so, you can actually assemble it just like you would for a burger patty. Then cook your lentils on the side, blend them very quickly, mix them in there with the rest of your herbs, and that's basically done. And of course, also to mention, remember the tenderness that we had mentioned earlier? Remember, it should actually be able to be consumed by someone even without teeth. I think now you managed to get the texture we
so
want.
many flavors.
So many flavors coming through.
It's super, like, I can't tell. It's super nice in the mouth.
So this is definitely one recipe you'll be taking home with you from the show.
Now this is something.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Preston. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen at home, we do thank you once again for tuning into the show today. Thank you once again for making time to be part and parcel of our show. I will, of course, give you a very, very small reminder before we close off the show. There is a 5-digit code on your screens. By texting or sending a text to that toll-free number, You'll of course be able to get back to us and by writing to us as well and giving us your name, your description, tell us where you're from, and maybe even something that you're very much keen and interested in learning on the show. Our producer and of course our directors will be happy to get back to you, and you may actually be the next guest on the show with us as well. But before we conclude, very important that I also remind you, if you've missed out on the recipe that we've worked on today, do remember you can recap on this and many others that you may have missed out on our show by subscribing and liking our YouTube channel. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. But from me and Preston here at Studios, it's a warm thank you once again for tuning in with us. And until the next episode, stay blessed and see you soon.
As I finish this.